Rihanna had a whole era of time where she was just showing up late for shows. She was just going on late just because she felt like it, you know. And I just remember during that time just being like, you know what, I know the fans are still there, but, you know, it's just a courtesy thing, you know. So even I've learned from them doing the wrong thing.
Justin, pretty punctual guy.
Yeah, always on time. Yep. Yeah.
How did that part of your career come about?
Oh, it's a very interesting story. So I was in Orlando, living in Orlando at the time, and I was doing a rehearsal with a local band at the Epcot Center. And the band next door was the band for NSYNC. So me just being me, I went next door, you know, knock on the door. Hey guys, what's up? I'm Charles, blah, blah, blah. And we talk, and I got to know the musical director. His name is Kevin Antunes really well. And that's how it all started. Like I kept up with Kevin throughout the years. And it just came to be that one day he was like, hey, why don't you come by the house and just hang out? And he asked me, did I want to go on tour with Justin Timberlake? And, you know, a week and a half later, I was on Jay Leno.
You were on board as the musical director at that point, or you kind of worked your way up?
No, I worked my way up, definitely. I wasn't, I didn't have my first musical director post until, well, actually it was with Sierra. It was maybe a year and a half later. But then with other artists, it didn't happen until much later on. But I was just there as a pianist and keyboardist.
Since we said something negative about Rihanna earlier, that another story that you relate, I think, in that conversation is that she actually called you on the phone, which is nice. That's like another thing that you don't really expect to get from people of that level. They've got assistants and managers and all these people. Yeah.
The cool thing was that at the time I was working for Timbaland, and we were in the studio working on the Good Girl Gone Bad album. And me and another producer and she and her best friend Melissa, we just all hung out for days and days at a time making music. So we kind of got a relationship through our time in the studio. And at that point I hadn't toured with her yet, but we were just friends, and she called and was like, hey, you want to go on tour? And I was like, yeah, of course. Are you kidding me? So it was just a privilege to have that sort of connection at that time, to where an artist can just call you personally and say, hey, dude, do you want to go out on the road?
You know, obviously there are a lot of ways in which it's kind of like a technical job, but it strikes me as something that, insofar as, you know, they're willing to make themselves available to you, that it's really important to have a personal connection to actually be able to, I guess, figure out see their vision into action.
I mean, the thing is, you know, especially with musical directing, it's all about their vision. You know, how can I help you bring your vision to life? And how can I best lead this group of musicians to make that vision come to fruition? So it's always like that when I work with artists. Like, to me, it's all about how can I be the best conduit for what you think that this show should be or should say or should convey to an audience. And very much so now, working for myself, now I am that person in charge of that job.
Is it a creative job?
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, very much so. There is a certain amount of creativity. I think creativity exists in everything. I think there's art in everything, you know. So I'm the guy that looks at the landscaper and says, wow, look at the art that he's doing. Or the guy who makes chairs, or the guy that, you know, designs street lamps, you know. So, or the stockbroker, you know, I look at there's art in everything. So, yeah, definitely being a musical director is a creative job.
Is it still a big part of your life, or now that this solo thing is happening, is it gone by the wayside?
Actually, no. It's not a big part of my life now. I do miss it at times. There's nothing like working with a band, with a group of musicians. But this new venture is very exciting by itself. Is, you know, being a solo artist, being a pianist with no, you know, backing band and everything is a different journey, but definitely not a boring journey. Very interesting.
Obviously, there's a big difference in carrying out someone else's vision and carrying out your own.
Yeah. I mean, it's a massive difference. For me, you know, carrying out my vision is just a thing where I have to ask myself the questions that I would normally ask the artist. And to me, those questions of what are you saying? What is the arc of this show? What is the storyline? What are you trying to convey? How do you want people to feel when they leave? How do you want them to feel when they come in? I mean, like, it's a whole a process that I'm used to doing with others that now I have to do for myself.
The scale is obviously different, you know, between you and a Rihanna or a Justin Timberlake
absolutely.
Right now. Like, I know that, you know, when you were out here in the city, you played Joe's Pub, which is, you know, it's a very nice venue, but it's not a huge one. But are there still learnings that you can apply to a smaller show?
Oh, absolutely. The same. I approach smaller shows with the same mentality, the same attitude, the same energy. You know, whether it's Madison Square Garden or Joe's Pub, like, it's this, to me, it's the same. It has to have the same effect. And, you know, to reach the person in the back of the room, whoever's the last person in the very back of the room, I want them to be able to get the message just as much as the person that's in the front row. So the approach is very similar. Now, the scale is different, but the approach is the same.
I have to assume that, like, a big part of your musical journey, I know it sounds corny to say that, but your musical life and your career is this act of having to win people over, because, you know, obviously there's a sense in which classical music is like a ubiquitous, like almost commodity at this point, but it's not something, I mean, especially younger generations really tend to engage with.
I think that this is a beautiful time for classical music, or new classical music, because there is this massive demographic of people who would love to be into this music. The thing that I think that's held us up is that it does not necessarily feel, or historically it has not felt like a emotionally comfortable place. Especially for, I will say this, and I'll be honest with this, especially for people of color. So I recently went to the symphony, and there was like me and one other black person.
Oh, when you say place, you mean like physicality?
Yeah, just
like
physicality coming to the symphony. Like, it has not been an emotionally safe place. So my job now is to create those spaces. And now that I'm creating those spaces, we see like this massive influx. I mean, one of the things that I love is when I play a show and then some guy that looks like he's like me from the West Side of Detroit, he's like, yo, bro, that was crazy. Like that, yo, that made me feel like I never felt before. I love those moments. And then right after that, there's, you know, 80-year-old grandma from New York that's like, you know what, that I've played classical music when I was young and I've always been a fan and I go to the symphony, but this was an amazing experience. So, you know, just to see the difference in the demographic. And that's one thing I can say about myself and my shows is that, you know, the demographic is everybody. It's so like, it's everyone all in one hodgepodge kind of getting an emotional experience.
I think last week was talking to a jazz pianist, was having this conversation around almost like two schools of thought when it comes to jazz. And obviously there's a lot of overlap, and, you know, he's certainly somebody who does a little bit of both, but there's the traditionalist, there's the people, you know, we think of like the Wynton Marsalises of the world and playing at Lincoln Center and trying to preserve this great heritage. And then there's the side of things that, you know, is like, jazz is an experimental art form, and it should always be an experimental art form. It should always be pushing forward. And it seems like, you know, I do listen to a fair bit of 21st century classical, but it's classical music suffers that a lot more as far as this academic pedestal that it tends to get put on, and it's hard for people to reach that.
Yeah, I mean, the genre itself is kind of built, and I know classical people may look at me a little crazy for saying this, but it's built on composer worshiping. Like, we're worshiping composers that have been dead for many, many, many years. Yes, they are the greats. Yes, they laid the foundation. Yes, they are absolutely incredible. But they were telling stories from their time. And I think it's important that we start to create and tell stories from our time. I just think that this new wave, or this new generation of classical musicians is, we're not so much based in the you know, quote unquote education of it all. It's more about expressing yourself and expressing yourself honestly. And I think that's a very strong place for us to be, especially moving forward as composers and musicians, is to be able to express these things that are happening around us. I think that's very, very, very important.
I talk about this a lot when I'm talking to people who perform classical music, but I'm one of those people who it took me a long time, a lot of banging my head to really actually for it to break through. And I was in Santa Cruz, which is where I went to school. I was speaking to a professor on the show, and it does like computer programs, like really early computer programmer, creating like BLK algorithms basically on the computer, like super interesting stuff. But I said, hey, I've been spending much of my adult life attempting to figure this thing out. And his suggestion was, he said, get the two Glenn Gould recordings of the Goldberg variations, one performed when he was in his 20s and one performed toward the end of his life. And they're dramatically different. I don't know if you've ever done like the 1-to-1, but in his 20s, it's like, as you expect, it's, he's super fast, super energetic. End of his life, like it's somber. He's not even that old, but it was somber. The very obvious realization dawned on me how much of classical music is interpretation more than any other genre, because there's this remove. And in the case of somebody like Bach, there is no recorded Bach. People don't even know how fast those things were intended to be played.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, classical music is 99.9% interpretation, especially if we're playing pieces that have, were written so long ago and so many people have performed these works. I think that, like I said, new works, the new stuff, the new interpretations. I think where we are in 2023 going into 2024 yields that we have this different way of viewing and of playing and expressing this music. Even like you said, even if you look at one person in their lifetime and their interpretation, the differences in where you are in your life. So for me, being a young composer and musician, I think this is a prime time to be expressing myself in how I see the world and giving people kind of a glimpse into how the world looks through my eyes.
So when you talk about telling stories in the modern context, you include interpretation in that as well?
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's all inclusive. I mean, the story, what's a story if it's not told in a certain way? So I think it's very important that the stories even have their own interpret. And it's so funny because I've seen other musicians playing my pieces, and I love to hear other interpretations. Like, oh, I didn't think of that there. I didn't think of that in that way. So each one of our personal tastes is very important to express.
I partially mean from the standpoint of, and there's an abstraction to instrumental music. I'm a writer is my job, so I'm used to words, right? And there's something very tangible about lyrics. And it is a big abstraction to deal with questions or subjects through instrumental music, something you're obviously very interested in, and is like, you could tell by the song titles on both of your records. But I'm wondering, is there a way to tell, like I would use like George Floyd as an example because he tackled that on the last record, to tell that story through a piece of music that was written hundreds of years ago?
I don't think so. I would say, and my best guess, I would say no, because you haven't experienced it. How can you tell a story about something you've never experienced?
Telling a modern story through an old piece of music by reinterpreting it.
Yeah, telling a modern story through an old piece of music. I think the only way to tell a modern story is with a modern piece of music. So I think, this is very much to your point that this is the newer generation of what classical music. We need to write music for our time. Like Beethoven wrote music for Beethoven's time, and Chopin wrote music for his times. But this is our moment. So I think for composers and pianists and musicians and instrumentalists, I think this is a whole new wave, a whole new generation of music that's going to be coming out. That's going to be very interesting. In
the George Floyd example, or in the example of the Little Rock Nine, or we can talk in a bit about what that Kanye track is about, because I
absolutely
would very much like to get into that. But what does it mean to deal with a very tangible, real thing, a thing that people have written and talked a lot about with a piece of instrumental music? Like, how do you process these ideas and these thoughts and these feelings through music?
The way I process it is to try and tell the best story I can without using words, which means that this has to be a natural expression of the emotion that I'm feeling in this moment. For instance, we're talking about the George Floyd piece. The beginning of the piece, it's so funny because that piece was written after, it was the last piece written for Black Book. And the event happened the day I finished. I had originally planned on having 10 songs. The 11th song was George Floyd, and it happened on the next day after I finished number 10.
The day you thought you were finished with the record.
The day I thought I was finished, I had to, run back and turn on the keyboard again and press record and just record how I felt. And as you'll hear at the beginning of that piece, I'm banging on the piano. It's literally anger and aggression getting out in its best form. I was mad, just like so many other people. And then you hear all these expressions of sorrow and this reflection of our history. At the end of the piece, it's the most important part, which is hope. There's this rising sort of feeling and hope. And at the very, very end of the piece, there's the motif of we shall overcome. So to answer that question is the emotions in their raw sense then become notes and harmonies and melodies. And I think that's the truest part of classical music, is being able to express yourself without saying words.
When you say motif, you mean you're taking a piece of that song and integrating it into your song?
Yeah, you'll hear the melody, we shall overcome, right at the end.
In a sense, that's an example of taking an older piece of music and applying it to the current moment. And, I know that you're well-versed in hip-hop. Hip-hop's all about sampling, so there's a sense in which hip-hop is all about applying older pieces of music to newer thoughts.
Yes and no. I mean, hip-hop is very much sample-based, but then there are pieces that aren't. They have no samples, that are actually new melodies, new harmonies. So, I mean, it's kind of a toss-up. I think that we can take inspirations from older pieces, but to say that it can directly, like to take a piece directly to speak about something that's happening right now, I don't think that's really, they really apply in that way.
What was it about George Floyd specifically? Obviously, like, in a lot of ways, not an isolated event. And, people often forget that things were real shitty before the pandemic started. It's been a rough, several years. Why was that the one that made you really sit down and instantly channel into music?
I mean, it was happening in real time. I had no other choice. My manager called me and he said, "Don't go outside." He said, "Go sit behind your piano and speak. People are waiting to hear your voice on this subject, so speak." And that's pretty much the basis of, like, all of my compositions are, let me just speak when it feels, let me be as vulnerable and open as possible. Even when I'm on stage, like, my whole objective when I go on stage is how much can I open my chest and let people see what's inside? How can they see my love and my pain and my vulnerabilities and my sorrows and my happiness and my joy? How can they see all of those emotions? So that carries me from writing and carries, on the stage, is how can I show as much of myself as possible.
And what role does the poetry or do the spoken word pieces play in that? Because they exist on both records.
Yeah. So on the first record was my good friend Lauren Delaphena. We had this conversation, and the whole conversation was, how do we create a twin sister for Black Book? So the Black Book album had already been written. We just needed to kind of, create this version of Black Book that was actually in words. And she's such a wonderful wordsmith, and we've had so many interesting conversations. and just hours and hours of talking and exchanging ideas. And then she would kind of go away for a week and come back with this poem, and it would just be spot on. It would be exactly what we intended. As well, she took creative chances like I took creative chances. One of the pieces that really stands out is The King's New Drip. For me, The King's New Drip means this is the piece that I wrote that was all new things that were foreign to my hands, foreign to my imagination, just all new. So she went and did a contrapuntal, which is, essentially The King's New Drip poem is 3 poems that can be read either separately or as one. So she took, creative risk that she had never taken the same way I had took creative risk, and in the same places and the same pieces and same points. It's very important, the whole spoken word side of it. And then for Dr. Thomas, I mean, she's been my therapist and life coach for so many years now. My question to her was, if you could speak to everyone and give them a piece of what you've given me throughout the years, what would you say? So those became the 4 spoken word pieces on the new album 9, which are just, these really, really, really raw nuggets of knowledge that she has shared with me throughout our time, and just decided to, put it on, record them, and I played something that just complemented everything that she said, and it worked out pretty well. I
was looking her up, and I think I found the right person. She also is or was a professor at U of M. Is that right? Different Felicia? So. Maybe different Felicia Thomas. Okay.
Yeah, maybe different Felicia Thomas. Yeah.
There are a lot of Felicia Thomases in the world, and that was the one where I was like, yeah, this could be, this makes sense. And I guess the reason why I couldn't find her is because, she's a therapist, so she's not really out there in the same way.
Right. Yeah.
Obviously very unusual to collaborate with your therapist. Was that, I don't know, was that a strange, was it ever uncomfortable?
Not ever, not once. It was magic from the moment I asked to the moment she said yes, to the moment we had conversations, and even for the moment I turned him into her and said, this is what we got. It was a magical collaboration. It was just the same as working with Lauren. To me, the message was so important, and it was the glue that tied the album together. To me, to have these really strong messages about awareness, a new reality for all of us is when you come into a state of awareness, your life can change. You can affect your life in different ways. She always says, you create your reality with your words. And now that I'm so very aware of the things that I say, my reality has changed. There are certain words that I don't use anymore. I've totally taken them out of my vocabulary, and other words that I use very, very often. So when I was able to shift the things that I say, I was able to shift the way that I appeared and the way that I presented myself in the world. And just myself, like my awareness. I know, those moments of feeling and deep feeling, and being able to take that awareness and put it into compositions. So this is kind of like a thing that affects not only the music, but affects my life as well.
Is she your first therapist?
No, not my first, but definitely the best one.
Yeah, well, obviously, the only one to appear on one of your records.
Yeah, she's amazing, yeah.
When did you start seeing somebody?
Probably the end of 2019. Yeah. Went through a bad breakup in 2019 and needed some answers. And that led to the creation of BLKBOK. So when BLKBOK was being created, this new knowledge that I had been given through therapy they kind of acted at the same time. And for me, I had never composed classical music before 2020. So this was like this was all brand new, uncharted territory I was in. But I think I did pretty good.
I had a lot of mostly subconscious aversions to it, but they're just the things that you live with, right? And you kind of take it for granted. Was it hard for you to make that step?
Not at all. I knew that I needed answers, and I knew I couldn't figure it out on my own. So now when I'm even doing my concerts and I talk about Dr. Thomas, I say to all the specifically to black men, like, dude, this world is complex. Why not get a second opinion? Why not get another mind that can help you navigate these crazy turbulent waters? And I think that's what therapy really is. It's just being able to have someone else to give you just a slight shift in perspective. And it can change the way you view the whole world. And it can, to make your life better. So why not make your life better? Go ahead and get therapy. It's easy. And then there's people like Dr. Thomas who offer therapy for underserved communities. And like there are people out there who are really fighting for the people who really need the help the most.
You said that when you took that first step, or I guess when you started seeing somebody, was around the time that BLKBOK was created. And it's interesting to hear that because like you refer to yourself by that name. So what does it mean that it was created?
Oh, I had never done this before. I had never written classical music or anything flavored like classical music before. I mean, my history is, as you know, is touring with pop artists. I played classical music and studied when I was a very young child, from about age 4 to about 16. But I had never tried anything like this. I was enrolled in a program called the Creatives Workshop, which was hosted by Seth Godin. And it was a 100-day commitment to do whatever you do creatively with accountability. So after you do it, you have to upload it to the website so people can see it. And for the first time, and I know for you as a writer, and for me as a songwriter, we don't write in public, but this was writing in public. Every day, people will be able to hear the music, whatever it is, if it's 15 seconds or 4 minutes or whatever it was that I posted for that day, people will be able to hear it, comment on it, give me real-time feedback. So BLKBOK was created in the process of this 100 days. Well, actually, it ended up being 121 consecutive days. I had never written music like this. I had never tried this before. I had never written in public before. And at the end of it, I had this album called Black Book, and I had learned this great skill. 1, how to be accountable to an audience, and 2, how to write in public. So even now, I have a secret Patreon where there's not a lot of people there, but I continue when I write pieces to say, hey guys, this is day 1. Hey guys, this is what I got on day 2. Hey guys, day 3 was trash. I got, poop emojis, 20 of them, so it's just this great creation that happened in 2020 during the lockdown, was the creation of BLKBOK.
Obviously, it prepared you for lockdown, and it prepared you for having a presence on like Instagram and being very social. But you did that throughout the writing of both records? You did them in public?
Yep. Both records were written in public.
You mentioned accountability. That's a big part of it, in the same way that like deadlines are important, right? And much like therapy, like that, it's that extra nudge you need. But I also understand the impulse or the desire to just, kind of step away with your thing for a while and come back with this new product you're serving up to people. What are the other benefits, or what are the other effects to composing in that way?
Oh, I think one of the benefits is that people are able to be with you on the journey. Traveling, it's traveling with a group of people. And I think that that's always better than traveling alone. It definitely has become a superpower for me, being able to bring people along, especially for the creative process. We're so used to, writing in the dark shed in the deep dark of night and doing our work and then presenting it when it's all kind of done and polished and read 300 times and proofread and everything like that. This is just a different way of composing for me. I've never done it in this way, but I really, really, it gives me, like I usually do consecutive days. And that really, really is one of the things that's been a benefit to me, especially learning that, and this is very controversial. It was controversial for me when I heard it, is that writer's block is a myth. And Seth Godin, yeah, exactly, your expression.
You know, I'm a writer. My entire professional career has been writing. I love writing. I still like writing every day. But I talk to a lot of writers who hate writing. And it baffles me that it's a painful process for them.
Yeah, it's not a painful process for me. I don't know what that is. I've never...
There are other things that you could do that would make you a lot more money than doing this. Why do you keep doing this thing if you hate it so much?
Yeah, it's strange. Yeah, but, you know...
It's like writer's block.
You know, one of the things I learned was that writer's block is simply the feeling that you may create something insignificant. So the idea is that writers write. So for me, consecutive days work for me. If I'm writing a piece, I want to be consecutive, you know, get it done in, 9 or 10 days or 7 days or 20 days, however long it takes. But the same thing is posting to the public and letting them know, actually what's happening as this piece progresses, as it grows.
I know a lot of artists generally, certainly a lot of musicians I talk to, have a very love-hate relationship with social media. A lot of them feel obligated to do it, and a lot of them are worried about the influence that kind of real-time feedback gives them, in that I've got this, specific artistic vision, and am I just doing this to cater to people? Am I just giving the people what they want? Is there a little bit of that push and pull with your process?
I think the push and pull with the writing and creative stuff, it does. I don't have that. But social media to me is something completely separate from what I do as far as writing and being a composer. I think social media is a whole other, it's another genre, honestly. Being able to serve the social audience in that way is different than being able, than writing new compositions. I don't feel like the push and pull happens on the creative side, on the composer side. On the social media side, it's just, I think the push and pull happens with, what will be something that resonates with people. So it's, you always ask that question, what do you think will resonate with this audience? And then usually in the end, I'd end up doing whatever I feel anyway. So I'm kind of like a vigilante in that way. And if it resonates with you, great. If it doesn't, that's fine too. I don't expect to get, 400 million likes on a particular post. It's never a goal. For me, it's not that I'm not thinking about those goals. Like, how many likes am I going to get, or how many follows am I going to get? It's more about, let me just put out something that I think is fun and I think that people will relate to.
On the compositional side, it's not about soliciting real-time feedback from people.
Yeah. No, not really. No, it's more about just expressing it myself and, letting people kind of see the journey as it unfolds.
Were your parents musical? Or are your parents musical?
My mother's side of the family is very musical. So I have my grandfather's name is Honeymoon Garner. He has
It's a great name.
Yeah, such a great name. He has a note on the Walk of Fame in Memphis, on the Memphis Beale Street Walk of Fame. I have another uncle who was a tap dancer with Gregory Hines and Sammy Davis Jr., another uncle who was a saxophonist with the Count Basie Band. My mother was a flautist. My sister is a pianist as well, so all the music comes from my mom's side. My dad's side, we're very organized. He's a computer person, so that comes in handy as well.
Flautists keep popping up on my radar recently. I don't know what it is. Maybe it's a Lizzo effect or something, but it just seems to be like in the air again.
Yeah, it's the Lizzo Andre 3000 effect.
That was an interesting one for me. I love the Outkast like every other human being on earth, but yeah, I don't know. We don't need to go too far down this because it's not super relevant to this conversation, but I'm curious to get your take on it because to me, it felt like somebody, obviously he's, kind of trying this stuff out and he's not, he's not an expert who's been, playing classical music his entire life. And it seemed like a lot of the heavy lifting was done in the production.
I just think this is a great way to express yourself in another way. I think, we all have it. We're not going to stay the same. And I believe that this is a new iteration of who he is. And either, again, you can love it or you can not love it. And it's fine. If you love it, then this is for you. If it's not for you, then, go listen to Outkast albums, which are still available,
It's, people talk about like living your best life, like that whole thing. And you got one guy playing the flute, the other guy's raising owls. Like, what if just a bunch of magical creatures they both became after?
Exactly. Yeah. I love that though, to see just like, how people evolve. I love that.
On a related note, it sounds like classical music was something that you were invested in from a very early age, and then you kind of moved away from for a while. Yeah,
very true. I say around age 16 or so, I was just like, let me see what jazz is all about. So I started studying jazz with some of the, legends in Detroit, some of the jazz masters, like the Marcus Belgraves and Teddy Harrises and Harold McKinney's and these absolute jazz monsters. And I just really went down that rabbit hole for a very long time. And, it just was something that, it just was kind of this natural thing. I then started playing with blues bands, and then I started making beats and producing. So I've kind of been this fish that's kind of flowed through every part of the ocean. And like in LA, I played with a rock and roll band. I went on tour with all these people. So it's just been a little bit of everything. And what I think now, the music that I create is the result of all of these experiences. A lot of times I look at the classical forms and I look at, the forms in my pieces, and I'm like, oh, this is exactly like this pop song. It's like a verse, a pre-chorus, chorus, like it's pop form, but with this different take on, I guess, what we would call quote unquote classical music. So, and I hear every once in a while, I'll play something that's really jazzy and I'll be like, oh, there it is. Like I'll hear myself kind of trigger something, or something bluesy, or something that it relates to hip hop. So it's just, this music is kind of like the, with the departure at a young age and then the return at this age, I returned with a lot more stuff, with a lot more like information from other places. So I think that definitely helps in the creation of what I'm doing now.
That's very foundational, especially in the case of blues. You're learning this, like, what's the word for it? Like this foundation that you built a house on top of, right? Like with blues, it's like 12-bar blues. And then, every blues song and every rock and roll song that came after was built on it. So it sounds like part of the process is really learning these foundational things and then determining what to build on top of them.
Very much so. And that's been my experience is, classical foundations, jazz foundations, blues foundations, rap foundations, pop music and its foundations, pop performance and its foundations, like all these things that go into making these specific genres great. And now it's just kind of like a whole gumbo of all that stuff now. 4 to,
I think you said 16. It sounds like 8 was really kind of when you really started to hit your stride, which is the same pianist that I was talking to last week, like started at a very young age. And I talk to a lot of like rock bands, and I'll be like, yeah, isn't it strange that you've been doing the same thing that, you were doing since you were 19? Like most people can't say that, but like you're essentially doing the same thing that you've been doing since you were 4 years old. It's wild.
Yeah, it's absolutely wild. I think about that too. Like, I've had other little jobs, but I've never not done music. It's been with me. It's been, my companion in life right now. So, and it's the best companion. It's so cool.
So you were doing like recitals, or what were you doing around those ages?
Yeah, I was doing recitals and competitions and getting scholarships and, you name what it takes, as a young classical musician, all of the above, all of the above. So it was pretty exciting. As a kid, I didn't realize what it was actually happening.
Because it's just life, yeah.
Yeah, it's
you don't
just
know anything
life.
else.
You're a kid, and you have your piano lesson on Saturday, and you practice throughout the week, and you have a competition that comes on in a couple months, and you pick your pieces, and you start working on them, and it is what it is. So for that period of time, I never realized exactly what was going on around me. It's just kind of going through the motions.
Did you catch shit from other kids?
Oh, of course. I grew up on the west side of Detroit. Like, oh my God. So the piano room in my house was in the very back. It was the very back room that was facing the alley. So the kids would come up the alley and they would knock on my window and be like, yo, you coming outside? And I'm like, nah, I got to practice, dude. Go, oh, man, you suck, whatever. And they would go play basketball or do whatever. So it was one of those things where, yeah, in school I did, it's not popular. I'm a black kid going to a black school playing classical music.
Yeah, if you were inside learning to DJ or to like MC or something, like that would be a different story. You're playing this old, stodgy, like white person music.
Yeah, exactly. And I give a lot of respect and a lot of props to my middle school band director, who's now like a family member to me, Miss Knox, who would have me play these pieces for the class. So very early on, the stage fright thing had to go away because I was forced by my middle school band director to play and perform in front of these terrible, terrifying
You're never going to get a worse
kids.
Audience than...
Yeah, exactly. You're never going to get a worse audience than middle school kids. And you're playing classical music. So very early on, I learned, like, okay, I just have to go and do what I do. And then, whatever. However they receive it is how they receive it.
I mean, there must have been some respect coming your way, just in the sense that you've mastered, people don't master things at that early of an age. Like, the kids must have been impressed, at least.
Yeah, there were some that were impressed. There were, others that weren't, could give less, But it was definitely, like I said, eye-opening to see the amount of people that were impressed. Because I didn't think anyone would be. I'm like, oh, these kids they're gonna put me through the grinder. And there were some that were very, I became friends with some because of that. And then some of them were like the worst of the worst kids too. Like some of the worst kids would be like, man, you really good. We got to make sure we look out for you, And that was one thing I will say, is that I grew up, the hood kind of protected me. They knew that I had a potential for something great, and it kind of like my friends in middle school wouldn't let me get in trouble with them. They would be like, nah, you go over there. We're going to go do this. So I definitely, there was a respect that was gained from some people, and I really, really appreciate that.
What is it specifically that brought you back to classical music?
I had never, so he was my publisher at the time. His name is Billy Mann. Billy Mann suggested at the end of 2019 that I write a solo piano album. And I literally told him on the phone, I said, I have no idea what that means. So I had never thought about doing a solo piano album.
I mean, you've listened to a lot of solo piano albums, jazz and classical, and...
Yeah, but never saw myself doing it. I had been touring with, John Mayer and Rihanna, and then I was playing, making hip hop beats on the side. So it was never this thing where I was alone. So he pitched the idea to me, and then I started working. I decided, okay, I don't know what my voice is. I have never discovered my voice. Like, what does, my government name, what does Charles Wilson sound like? And my first album, Black Book, was the discovery of that sound.
So he suggests solo piano, and it could have been jazz, it could have been classical.
Could have been anything.
And just through the process of composing and playing, this is where you landed.
This is where I landed, exactly.
We're talking about Big Boy and Andre 3000, but there are other hip-hop careers that have not turned out as well for in terms of, emotional state and stability. It's funny, and funny is not the right word, but again, reading back in the interviews, you were talking about Rihanna in one of them, and you mentioned that you were listening to 808 Heartbreaks at the time, and like what a next level genius Kanye is, obviously. What's your relationship to his music now?
Now I have no relationship to his music. And that's because of, the obvious reasons, the downward progression of some of his views and opinions.
Talking up Hitler, for example.
Yeah. I just, who I am and where I'm going can't support those type of things. So it's just, that was a moment in time, and I love those moments. Like, I listen back to, like, I don't listen to it anymore, but I think about those times listening to 808s and Heartbreaks or any of his albums, and just, like, it makes me sad, but it's I have to be who I am now, and who I am now doesn't support exactly the artist or the human that he's become or becoming.
It's a funny thing because, like, for me, not listening to his last couple records hasn't been difficult because I'm just not super interested. But I'm a big Ty Dolla $ign fan. That record's coming out, and that's going to be a hard one to not listen to.
I don't know. Like, I just can't support it. The humanitarian in me says, "Oh my God, this doesn't feel right." And I think that's the most important thing, is to honor myself and how I feel about a certain situation and a particular artist. And, it's no diss to him. And I hope that, this all in the wash, I hope that this makes him a better person, honestly.
It'd be great if he pulls through.
That would be great, and, this kind of Phoenix Rising situation, I would love that.
From where I sit, and this is unfair, but from where I sit, he seems like somebody who's off his meds, and that's causing a lot of havoc in his life.
I mean, to me, from where I sit, yes, you're off your meds, but you need to address the real problem. Like, meds are just there to kind of, help. But as well as you're getting the help, you have to address the root. And I feel like there's no attention being paid to any of the roots. And in his case, there's no roots, no trees, no limbs, no leaves, no nothing is being paid attention to. He's just kind of off and blowing in the wind. So, like I said, I hope that this is like this happy story. This story has a happy ending, because, I was a fan. I definitely was a fan. And, the piece on my album, The Dissolution of Kanye West, speaks to that. It's a dirge, which is basically my expression of how sad I am that I can no longer be a fan. So, people ask me all the time, like, oh, is that controversial? I'm like, no, it's not a controversial piece. It's simply an expression of how I feel, having been a fan and knowing that now I can't support continuing forward.
I think there are a lot of parallels to be drawn between him and Elon Musk right now, where if enough people in your life tell you you're a genius, you start to believe it, and that can be a problem.
Yeah. I just, for both of them, more than anything, I hope they get better. I hope that, help. I hope they get the help that they need. I hope they get them a Dr. Thomas.
Get them a Dr. Thomas. Yeah, she's up for it.
Exactly.
She probably doesn't have a lot of free time, but
she can definitely fix them up, no problem.